What if the most powerful person in the room was the one nobody saw coming? She didn't wear a suit. She didn't carry a title. She carried a mop. But when the moment came, she didn't just clean the floor. She wiped away decades of arrogance, ignorance, and quiet prejudice. In a luxury hotel where image was everything, one woman's silence was mistaken for weakness until she spoke. And when she did, in a language none of them expected, the entire power structure cracked open. This isn't just a story about a billionaire or a broken system. It's about the strength of being underestimated and what happens when dignity finally refuses to stay quiet. Stay with us, because the woman you're about to meet didn't demand power. She embodied it, and she changed everything. What if the most overlooked person in a five-star hotel was the only one who could stop a multi-million-dollar disaster? What if the woman mopping the floors held the key to saving an international reputation, and no one knew because no one bothered to ask? This is not a story about a mistake. This is a story about every overlooked woman who was told she wasn't qualified to speak until she did. And when she did, the entire room finally went quiet. The Grand Sapphire Hotel sparkled with marble, glass, and entitlement. Guests in designer luggage dragged their privilege behind them. At the reception desk, tension crackled like static. Beside a bouquet of white lily and gold nameplates, 3 professional translators stood helpless, staring at each other with confusion and rising panic. The guest they were failing to assist was Mei Kobayashi, Japanese, technology magnate with a calm demeanor and eyes sharp as polished obsidian. Her silence wasn't passive, it was loaded. Her assistant tapped frantically at his phone, perhaps canceling a meeting that might cost the city millions. Meanwhile, across the lobby, Nadine Carter scrubbed the marble tiles with the rhythm of someone used to disappearing. At 32, Nadine had spent 6 years as a cleaning woman in the Grand Sapphire. Her badge didn't carry a title. Her cart didn't carry respect. She moved through lobbies and lounges like fog, ever present, never seen. But today, something in her eyes broke that rhythm. Behind the receptionist's desk, hotel manager Trisha Whitmore huffed dramatically, her blazer sharper than her tone. "That Asian woman has been blocking the desk for over 40 minutes, she snapped. "If she can't speak English, what is she doing in an American hotel?" The translators looked helpless. "She doesn't respond to Mandarin, Korean, or Thai," one of them said. "She's unresponsive." But Mei wasn't unresponsive. Nadine saw it. From her low vantage point beside a cleaning bucket, she caught the subtle twitch in Mei's jaw, the way her fingers curled just slightly with every insult thrown her way. Nadine knew that look. She had worn it herself. The look of someone understanding. Far more than they let on of someone being humiliated in a language they understood fluently, all while pretending not to understand a word. Trisha's voice kept rising, growing performative. "If we don't resolve this, we'll have to cancel her presidential suite." Can you imagine the loss? Her junior staff looked on, panicked. "Miss Kobayashi runs a tech empire," one whispered. "If she walks out of here, we're finished." Social media would end us, but Trisha didn't hear warnings. She only heard herself. Nadine tightened her grip on the mop. She had been here before in silence. Fired from a janitorial agency years ago after defending a Mexican colleague who was mocked for broken English. No one cared then. They didn't ask how Nadine could understand 5 languages, or how she used to work as a volunteer translator for global aid groups. Those things didn't fit the narrative of a black cleaning woman. They still didn't. But this time, the disrespect wasn't abstract. It had a face. A woman standing at the center of a storm, being treated like furniture in a place she was, paying thousands of dollars to stay. Nadine had been invisible for too long, and invisibility was no longer survival. It was complicity. She rose slowly, setting down the cleaning cloth with the precision of a woman who had just made a decision. And as Tricia Whitmore rolled her eyes and began another tirade about how this is America, Nadine walked calmly, confidently toward the chaos. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for a cue. She looked Mei in the eye and spoke not in English, but in flawless Japanese. "Kobayashi-san, I'm sorry for the way you've been treated. I understand you've had a difficult time. May I assist you?" The effect was instantaneous. Mei's expression, carved in stone for nearly an hour, melted into startled recognition. Then something softer, relief. A moment of silence fell over the room, thick as velvet. Tricia's jaw dropped. The translators looked at each other in embarrassment. A janitor had done what they could not. For a moment, you could have heard a pin drop in the five-star Grand Sapphire lobby. And that's saying something, considering the click-clack of luxury heels and hum of entitled chatter that usually filled the air like perfume. Nadine stood, tall, her uniform damp from cleaning solution, but her voice had never been drier, crisper, more precise. The Japanese words flowed effortlessly, not just textbook Japanese, but the soft Kyoto inflection that suggested years of listening, of living within a culture rather than merely memorizing it. Mei Kobayashi responded instinctively, almost reflexively, her voice low and measured. She asked, with a curious tilt of her head, how Nadine had come to speak Japanese so fluently, and with modesty that only sharpened the gravity of the moment. Nadine replied, "A little. I spent some time at a Kyoto language institute and volunteered with immigrant communities for a few years. That humble phrasing wasn't false modesty. It was restraint honed from years of knowing that your brilliance won't be believed, no matter how brightly it shines." Tricia Whitmore, still blinking, finally found her voice, but it was cracked. You're the cleaning lady," she stammered. "You're not supposed to be interacting with guests. This is a breach of protocol." But no one was listening to her anymore. Not Mei, not the translators, who suddenly seemed smaller in stature, and certainly not Marcus Langston, the senior concierge, who had quietly stepped forward. He was the only black man on the hotel's executive team, and he knew what this moment meant. Tricia's authority, once a tidal wave in every room, was beginning to recede. Mei Kobayashi turned to Nadine and, in a voice that floated above the tension like incense, sighed, "Your pronunciation is beautiful. You understand not just the words, but the heart." Tricia tried again, her tone flailing. "This is unprofessional. Marcus, say something. She's stepping out of line." Marcus didn't flinch. "Actually, Miss Whitmore, I think our guest is finally receiving proper service. And Miss Carter," he turned deliberately toward Nadine, using her last name formally for the first time in 6 years, has clearly addressed a communication breakdown that none of our contracted professionals could. The blow was polite, but devastating. Nadine didn't gloat. She turned back to Mei and bowed slightly. I'd be honored to resolve any misunderstandings with your reservation. Please allow me to help." Mei nodded with genuine gratitude. And then in a quiet voice laced with steel, she turned to Trisha and spoke in perfect English. "The only scandal in this hotel is your behavior, Miss Whitmore." The weight of those words was seismic. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Trisha looked like she had been slapped. "You speak English?" she croaked. "Fluently," Mei replied, and I understood every insult, every belittling remark. I chose silence not out of ignorance, but observation. For a woman known to invest in silence more than spectacle, it was the equivalent of thunder. Trisha's facade crumbled. I didn't know who you were," she began, but Mei cut her off with a raised hand. "That's precisely the problem. You assumed because of my accent, my silence, my skin, that I was inferior. And now your assumptions are costing you more than dignity. They're costing you your job." In her hand, Mei held her phone. It had been recording since the first insult. The recording was damning, not just because it existed, but because everyone in the room already knew what was on it. They had heard it. They had watched it unfold in real time in the cathedral of luxury that was the Grand Sapphire's marble-clad lobby. And now it was permanent preserved in audio and surveillance footage, and the minds of every person who had witnessed a woman in power wield that power with arrogance and venom. Trisha Whitmore stood frozen, her mouth slightly ajar, as Mei Kobayashi outlined the next few steps not in anger, but in corporate clarity. "I'm the CEO of Kobayashi Global," she said. "My company has standing contracts with your hotels. Parent chain $12 million annually in corporate hosting. I also serve on the International Tourism Board that rates and certifies luxury accommodations for Asian executives worldwide." You could feel the oxygen evacuate the room. "And I will be submitting a full report with documentation." Trisha stumbled backward slightly. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't know she. You didn't care to know," Marcus Langston interrupted. For 6 years, he had watched her parade around like royalty, dismissing every non-white employee as unfit for serious responsibility. And now, in front of her peers, her power was dissolving. Nadine Carter didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Mei turned to her and said, "I looked up your name, Miss Carter. While this unfolded, I ran a background check." Trisha whipped her head around, confused. You did what?" "I did what you refused to," Mei replied. "I saw someone of value and took the time to confirm it." She turned back to Nadine. "You have a degree in linguistics with honors. You've worked as a volunteer interpreter in crisis zones. You speak 5 languages fluently, including mine." Nadine, blinking in astonishment, replied softly, "I didn't think that mattered anymore." "It does," Mei said. "It always does. The problem is most people forget that until they're being recorded." There was a pause. A collective intake of breath. Trisha's phone began to ring violently. Caller ID, Regional Director. Her hands trembled as she answered. "Mr. Dawson, I know, sir. I didn't. She's just the cleaning. No, I didn't know." She crumbled mid-sentence, her voice a croak. Nadine stepped slightly aside, her posture respectful, but her presence now completely undeniable. The same staff who had walked past her without eye contact were now seeing her, really seeing her. Some with guilt, others with admiration, all with the recognition that something irreversible had happened. Trisha hung up. Her voice, barely audible, cracked. "I've been terminated, effective immediately." No one responded. Not even to fake sympathy. She looked around for a moment, as if hoping to find an ally. But no one stepped forward. Not even the junior receptionist who used to fetch her lattes. Trisha walked out of the lobby like a ghost. And as the revolving doors closed behind her, the air shifted. It didn't feel like a hotel anymore. It felt like a reckoning. As the door closed behind Trisha Whitmore, it was not just her career that exited. It was a decades-old hierarchy built on assumptions. In her absence, the lobby didn't just return to normal. It entered something new, something better. And Nadine Carter, for the first time in years, stood without flinching in a place where she had always been told to shrink. Marcus Langston stepped forward, extending a quiet nod of respect. "Miss Carter," he said again, formally, "we appreciate your role in de-escalating what could have been an international scandal." Nadine responded with the faintest smile. It was the smile of a woman who had nothing left to prove, only something to offer. Mei turned to her again, and, with the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to making life-altering decisions before breakfast, said, "I'd like to speak with you privately." And within the hour, that conversation had led to a job offer, not a symbolic promotion, not a PR gesture, a real opportunity. "Coordinator of Intercultural Relations," Mei said, "at our U.S. operations office, starting at $90,000 a year, full benefits, relocation covered. I need someone who understands more than just language. Someone who can recognize what others overlook." Nadine didn't cry. She nodded. She accepted. She had always been qualified. Now she was simply being recognized. That moment, shared in a quiet executive lounge above the chaos of the lobby, was the start of her second life. Within 6 months, Nadine had traded her mop for a nameplate, her cleaning cart for a corner office, and the heels that once clicked aggressively across floors she'd polished now walked beside her, not over her. She launched cultural sensitivity programs at over a dozen partner companies. She created hiring pipelines that targeted overlooked multilingual workers. She brought in interns who reminded her of who she used to be: young, invisible, brilliant. Marcus, who had stood beside her when it counted, joined her as her chief of staff. Their partnership became a model of what corporate inclusion actually looked like when done with integrity and not for image. And somewhere in a far less glamorous corner of the city, Trisha Whitmore scrolled job listings in a cramped apartment. Her name was now synonymous with corporate humiliation. Every hotel chain flagged her in their HR systems. Her former colleagues avoided her calls. The social media clip of her tirade had gone viral, reposted again and again as a case study in what not to do. The same mouth that once silenced others had ended up silencing her own career. Nadine never gloated. When asked about Trisha in interviews or keynotes, she always gave the same answer: "I hope she learned something valuable about dignity. I don't need revenge. I've already won." Mei Kobayashi continued to mentor her. They dined at Japanese restaurants, shared stories of corporate battles, and built an alliance based not on saving face but on raising voices. Real voices. The kind of voices that had once been dismissed for being too accented, too emotional, too unpolished. Voices like Nadine's. In the months that followed, Nadine Carter's name traveled further than any uniform she had ever worn. She didn't just take the job, she transformed it. Within a year, she was consulting for global partners, hosting webinars on cultural fluency, and even advising government panels on inclusive business practices. But more than her resume, it was her story that rippled through the professional world like a fire igniting dry leaves. People weren't inspired because she got a promotion. They were inspired because she proved the system wrong without ever raising her voice. Nadine didn't lecture, she demonstrated. Her speeches went viral, not because she was loud, but because she was real. Power, she said once on stage, isn't about being heard the loudest. It's about choosing when to speak. And what silence you're willing to break. She broke the silence for thousands. In hotels, in offices, in online forums, people began to ask, how many Nadines have we ignored? How many janitors speak 5 languages? How many assistants hold advanced degrees? How many immigrants, women of color, older workers have we dismissed because of an accent, a uniform, a pause before speaking? Nadine's work changed hiring practices. She built toolkits. She started mentorship programs. She became the first Black woman to lead an intercultural innovation division in Kobayashi Global's history. And through it all, she stayed grounded. Her office kept a framed photo of her old cleaning cart, not as a token of shame, but as a reminder. I don't carry mops anymore, she told a new intern one day, but I carry what that job taught me, how to observe, how to listen, how to survive being unseen, and when the time came, how to make being seen impossible to ignore. The intern, a young Latina named Elena, nodded. She had been a hotel housekeeper too, and Nadine had personally recruited her. That's how change multiplies, not with press releases, but with real hands pulling others up. Meanwhile, Trisha Whitmore became a kind of footnote, a tragic irony. She had once walked through the Grand Sapphire lobby as if she owned it. Now she passed through spaces hoping not to be recognized, but the internet remembers. Her name was a case study in everyday year training, her meltdown a meme. Her voice once, so sharp now silenced by consequence. Still, Nadine never wished her harm. She didn't need her to suffer to feel validated. Justice, Nadine believed, wasn't about punishment. It was about exposure, about revealing what was already there. When Mei Kobayashi was asked in an interview why she had hired Nadine, she replied, because she was already more qualified than everyone else. All I did was stop ignoring her. 6 months after Trisha Whitmore's public fall and Nadine Carter's improbable rise, the Grand Sapphire Hotel, once a symbol of polished stone and invisible hierarchy, underwent a transformation more radical than any renovation. It didn't change because it wanted to. It changed because it had to. International headlines, investor pressure, and guest boycotts forced the hotel's board to look inward, and what they saw wasn't flattering. They discovered that their brand's reputation had been built on exclusion dressed as excellence. The recordings, especially Mei Kobayashi's quietly searing takedown of the institution, were not just public, they were permanent. So the board acted fast. Trisha Whitmore's old office was converted into a cultural liaison suite. Day training, once a dusty document buried in onboarding, became a mandatory, quarterly, high-profile initiative. Promotion policies were overhauled. Language programs were offered to staff. And, in a twist that even Hollywood would call poetic, Mei Kobayashi didn't just return as a guest, she became a minority investor. Her money came with conditions, audits, transparency, and real hiring equity. She didn't invest for profit. She invested to make the transformation irreversible. Meanwhile, Nadine kept moving forward. She partnered with universities to build programs that funneled under-recognized talent into leadership roles. She advised on legislation that supported immigrant workers. And through it all, she never lost sight of her origin. Every new initiative asked the same question: who are we not seeing? At a gala hosted by Kobayashi Global, Nadine was asked to speak. The crowd was full of CEOs, investors, and world-class influencers. She didn't dress up her message. She didn't recite corporate talking points. She told a story. Her story. I once worked in a place that taught me I had to disappear to survive, she said. But then I spoke. And I realized that when we refuse to remain silent, when we decide we are worthy of being seen, everything changes. Not just for us, for everyone watching. Mei, seated front and center, stood and clapped before anyone else did. The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was seismic. Because it wasn't just about Nadine. It was about every person in that room who had ever worn a mask to fit in. It was about every front desk worker who spoke better French than their general manager, but never got promoted. It was about every immigrant whose resume got tossed because of a last name that sounded complicated. Nadine's story had started a movement, one not built on outrage, but excellence. A story of redemption not rooted in revenge, but in renewal. Nadine Carter now sat behind a glass wall that overlooked a skyline she used to clean from the outside. From bathrooms to boardrooms, from mop handles to microphones, her rise was not a fantasy. It was a quiet, persistent revolution that had waited years to be noticed. She no longer second-guessed her voice. She no longer rehearsed her worth. And what made her success powerful wasn't just where she landed, but how she brought others with her. On the 15th floor of Kobayashi Global's U.S. headquarters, she ran her department with precision and empathy. Her door was never closed. Her table always had extra seats. She found talent where others didn't look like in hotel kitchens, in night school classrooms, in places resume filters ignored. One of her best hires was a young woman named Carla, formerly a dishwasher at a competing hotel. Fluent in 4 languages, no college degree. Never interviewed beyond the first round until Nadine saw her for what she was. Brilliant, determined, unseen. Now Carla led multicultural outreach in 3 states. That's the kind of leadership Nadine built, one rooted in memory, never amnesia. She never forgot the sound of heels walking past her like she was part of the furniture. She never forgot how it felt to be ignored for knowing more than her supervisor. She didn't weaponize that memory, but she used it to design something better. Meanwhile, across the city, Trisha Whitmore lived a life that had become a cautionary tale. Her name was still tagged in day case studies. She worked retail now, department store, minimum wage. She applied for PR roles, but her reputation trailed her like a shadow. The video never disappeared. Her downfall had become a permanent footnote in corporate diversity training. But Nadine never took pleasure in it. Justice, she told a colleague once, isn't about watching someone fall. It's about making sure the next person can rise. When reporters called her for comment about Trisha, she offered none. She declined interviews that tried to pit their stories against each other like some revenge drama. She knew the truth. Trisha wasn't her antagonist. She was just a final obstacle before Nadine found her voice. At Kobayashi Global, Nadine's legacy grew. She built the company's first ever program that connected underprivileged youth with language, scholarships, and internship pathways. She authored a book, The Floor I Cleaned Became My Stage, which became a bestseller. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was honest. Her TEDx talk reached over 5 million views in 6 months. And perhaps most powerful of all, she never left behind her gratitude. One afternoon, during a rooftop lunch with Mei Kobayashi, Mei smiled and said, "You know, I never expected to meet you that day in the lobby." Nadine laughed gently. "Neither did I, but I'm glad you did. You saw me." Mei shook her head, lifting her teacup. "No, you made it impossible not to, and that was the truth." Nadine didn't rise because someone handed her a ladder. She rose because she refused to stay where she was. Because excellence, even when ignored, doesn't stay silent forever. It finds its moment. And when it speaks, the whole room listens. Never assume silence means ignorance. Never mistake a uniform for inability. And never forget, the most powerful revolution often begins with someone who spent a lifetime being overlooked until they decide to stop apologizing for their brilliance. Excellence doesn't need revenge. It needs recognition.